There's a special kind of pain that comes from being invisible to the person who should see you most clearly. But there's also a special kind of power in knowing your worth, even when no one else does. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to True Stories, the place where real emotions meet powerful truths. Before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you gave them pieces of yourself, only to watch them build an empire on your sacrifice while forgetting your name? Today's story will shake you. It will make you question loyalty, love, and the price of silence. This is the story of Harper Lane, a woman who was erased from her own creation, dismissed by the man she built up, and told she'd no longer fit the image. But here's what they didn't know: the quiet ones are always watching. Always learning. Always remembering. So grab your headphones, settle in, and prepare yourself, because this story isn't just about heartbreak. It's about resurrection. Harper Lane always believed that silence could carry more weight than screaming into the void. She learned this truth the hard way, through 7 years of loving a man who saw her as background music to his symphony. Picture this: a woman in her late 20s, unremarkable to most eyes. No designer clothes screaming for attention. No Instagram presence carefully curated for likes. Just quiet intelligence burning behind hazel eyes that noticed everything: the way code patterns revealed hidden inefficiencies, the way Dylan's smile never quite reached his eyes when investors were watching, the way respect slowly leaked out of their relationship like water through cracked glass. Harper wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense that stops traffic. But she had something rarer, the kind of beauty that grows on you slowly, like watching a sunrise you didn't know you were waiting for. High cheekbones that caught light at certain angles. Hands that moved with surgical precision across keyboards. A voice that stayed steady even when her world was crumbling. And she had a superpower that nobody recognized: she could see systems, not just in code, but in people, in relationships, in the architecture of entire companies. While others saw chaos, Harper saw patterns. While others saw problems, Harper saw elegant solutions waiting to be written. For 7 years, she used that superpower to build someone else's dream. That night, silence filled the penthouse like heavy fog settling over a graveyard. The apartment overlooked downtown Chicago, a sprawling canvas of glass towers and endless streams of headlights bleeding into the darkness far below. Inside, marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting. The air carried the faint scent of expensive cologne and polished wood. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt hollow. Dylan Brooks stood near the wide kitchen island, dressed in a tailored navy suit even though it was past 9 p.m. His phone rested in his hand like a sacred object, more important, more real, more worthy of attention than the woman standing 10 feet away from him. He was handsome in that calculated way that magazine covers love. Sharp jawline. Perfectly styled dark hair with just enough product to look effortless. The kind of smile that had convinced investors to write 7-figure checks. But Harper had learned to see past the packaging. She'd learned that charisma without character is just performance art. Harper leaned lightly against the dining table, her posture deceptively casual. She had just finished cleaning up the dishes from a dinner he'd barely touched, too busy scrolling through Twitter mentions and LinkedIn notifications to taste the homemade pasta she'd spent an hour preparing. He didn't look at her when he began speaking. His voice was smooth, practiced, the same tone he used in boardroom presentations. He talked about California investors flying in next week. About how image mattered now more than ever. About how the company was no longer a small dream built in a garage but something global, something significant. Then he finally looked at her. And with the same casual indifference someone might use to discuss changing office furniture, he said she didn't fit the image anymore. The words were simple. Calm. Almost polite. That was what made them hurt. Harper felt something inside her chest tighten, not break, but crystallize. Like molten glass suddenly exposed to freezing water, transforming into something harder, clearer, unbreakable. But her face didn't change. She had learned long ago that reacting only gave people satisfaction. Tears were ammunition. Anger was entertainment. But silence? Silence made people uncomfortable. Silence made them reveal themselves. 7 years. 7 years of believing in him before anyone else did. 7 years of sitting beside him at 2 a.m. while he typed code he barely understood, then quietly rewriting entire sections after he fell asleep on the couch, his face still glowing in the blue light of the screen. 7 years of waitressing double shifts at a small diner on West Adams Street, burning her feet on sticky floors, forcing smiles at grabby customers, counting tips in the parking lot under fluorescent lights, so he could pay for servers and marketing tools and pitch deck designers. She remembered their first apartment with painful clarity. Tiny. Cracked walls like spider webs. A heater that rattled and coughed but never quite warmed the bedroom. They used to eat instant noodles at midnight, sitting cross-legged on a mattress on the floor because they couldn't afford a bed frame yet. Back then, Dylan used to hold her hand and say, "We're building something together, Harper. You and me. We're going to change everything." She believed him. God help her, she believed him. She believed him when he forgot to thank her in his first press interview. He's nervous, she told herself. It's his first time in the spotlight. She believed him when he stopped asking for her input on technical decisions. He's growing confident, she reasoned. That's what I wanted for him. She believed him when he started introducing her as my girlfriend, instead of my partner, at networking events. Partner sounds too formal, he'd explained. People relate better to the romance angle. She believed him right up until the moment he stood in their multi-million-dollar penthouse, bought with technology she had architected, and told her she no longer fit. Now he stood there, in his expensive suit, in his expensive apartment, built on her invisible labor, telling her she wasn't good enough for the life she'd helped create. Grant Holloway sat on the sofa, scrolling through social media, pretending not to listen but soaking up every word like a vulture circling fresh roadkill. Grant was Dylan's business partner, or more accurately, his professional cheerleader. He handled marketing and investor relations, which mostly meant looking good in suits, laughing at rich people's jokes, and taking credit for other people's work. He had the kind of face that looked trustworthy in LinkedIn photos but revealed its emptiness in person. He gave a short laugh and muttered, "Success requires upgrades, man. It's just business." Harper looked at Grant once. Not with anger. Not with offense. Just, measuring him. The way you might study an insect under glass, curious about how something so small could make so much noise. Dylan continued speaking, his words rehearsed, polished. He said it would be better if she moved out before the investor gala. It would avoid confusion. He would transfer some money to help her find a place. Like charity, Harper said quietly. Her voice was steady. Measured. The same tone she used when debugging code, identifying problems without emotion. That response made Dylan pause. He'd expected tears. Pleading. Maybe a dramatic argument he could later reframe as emotional instability when explaining to friends why they broke up. Instead, she simply turned and walked toward the bedroom. The sound of closet doors sliding open echoed down the hallway like a countdown timer nobody could stop. Dylan followed slowly, uncertain why her calmness unsettled him more than screaming would have. Harper pulled 2 suitcases from the back shelf. The wheels clicked softly as they touched the floor, a sound that felt final, irreversible, like a lock tumbling into place. She folded her clothes neatly. Each movement was deliberate, controlled. She packed only what truly belonged to her, the comfortable jeans she'd worn before designer labels mattered, the worn college sweatshirt Dylan had once called embarrassing, the books she'd read alone while he networked at clubs she wasn't invited to. She left behind the designer bags he'd bought after the company secured Series B funding. Left behind jewelry he'd given her during magazine interviews to make her look the part. Left behind every expensive thing that was meant to transform her into someone he wouldn't be ashamed of. Each discarded item was a piece of armor she no longer needed. Dylan leaned against the doorway, watching with growing unease. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I have options," she replied. He frowned. He didn't know she had options. While he'd been busy attending networking events and posing for magazine features and giving TED-style talks about disrupting the logistics industry, Harper had been working quietly. Not for him. For herself. She reached under the dresser and removed a small black external hard drive. It fit into her palm easily, innocent, unremarkable. She slipped it into her purse without explanation. Dylan noticed. "What's that?" "Something I created," she said simply. "A long time ago." He didn't press further. He assumed it was personal photos or old college projects. Things that didn't matter. He made the mistake of assuming many things about Harper Lane. When her suitcases were packed, she zipped them closed. The sound felt like a door slamming on 7 years of her life. She walked past Dylan. For a second, their shoulders almost touched. He smelled her familiar scent, jasmine and rain, and felt a flicker of something close to doubt. But pride is always louder than doubt. Grant stood up as she entered the living room, rolling her suitcases behind her. He had that smug expression men wear when they think they've won something. "Within a month," he said, "you'll realize how expensive the world is. Women always come back when the money runs out." Harper paused at the door. She turned her head slightly and looked at Dylan directly, not Grant, never Grant. Grant didn't matter enough to waste eye contact on. Her eyes weren't sad. They weren't angry. They were clear. Like someone who'd just made a decision that would change everything. That expression stayed with Dylan long after she left. It would haunt him in the weeks to come, during board meetings, during investor calls, during sleepless nights when he'd replay this moment and wonder what exactly he'd just lost. The door closed gently behind her. No drama. No shouting. No tears. No slammed doors or broken dishes or theatrical pronouncements. Just silence. Outside, the night air felt cold against Harper's skin. She stood still for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the city noise surround her, car horns, distant sirens, the low hum of a million lives being lived simultaneously. Chicago at night had always felt like a living thing to her. Dangerous and beautiful. Indifferent and full of possibility. She didn't cry. She felt something else entirely. Relief. Like a weight she'd been carrying for so long that she'd forgotten it was there had suddenly lifted. Like taking off shoes that were 2 sizes too small and feeling blood rush back into compressed toes. She opened her phone and typed a short message. "I'm ready." The response came within seconds. "The car is waiting at the private terminal." Harper rolled her suitcases toward the street. As she moved through the cooling night, she thought about the first time she met Sebastian Cole. It had happened quietly, almost by accident, the way the most important moments in life often do. 3 months before that devastating night in the penthouse, something extraordinary had happened in Harper's invisible world. She'd submitted a cybersecurity proposal anonymously to a private investment firm. She used a neutral email address, no name, no photo, just pure technical brilliance laid bare on digital pages. She called herself Cypher, both a code reference and a subtle joke about her own invisibility. She never expected a response. The proposal was an experiment, a way to prove to herself that her work had value beyond Dylan's shadow. But she received one. Sebastian Cole was known in financial circles as a ghost billionaire, someone whose wealth was undeniable but whose presence was minimal. He didn't give TED Talks. He didn't pose for magazine covers. He didn't attend charity galas where champagne cost more than most people's monthly rent. He invested in intelligence, not noise. What most people didn't know was that Sebastian had built his empire by finding invisible talent, the engineers who wrote code that changed industries but never got credit, the designers who created iconic brands while working in windowless offices, the architects of innovation who were erased by charismatic frontmen. He had a gift for seeing what others missed. When he received Harper's proposal, he spent 2 weeks tracing it back to her real identity. Not to expose her, but to understand her. He looked at patent filings, GitHub commits with her digital fingerprints, code architecture that bore her distinctive style, elegant, efficient, almost musical in its logic. He saw what Dylan had been too blind to notice: Harper Lane wasn't just talented. She was exceptional. Instead of exposing her, he invited her to meet. They met in a quiet hotel lounge in Chicago, not one of the flashy rooftop bars Dylan preferred, but an understated space with leather chairs and soft lighting where conversations could happen without performance. Sebastian looked nothing like the tech bros Harper was used to. Mid-40s, graying at the temples, wearing a simple black sweater and jeans. No Rolex. No Tesla keys casually placed on the table. No need to prove anything to anyone. He listened more than he spoke, a rarity in Harper's world, where men like Dylan and Grant talked endlessly about their visions, their disruptions, their genius. Sebastian asked precise questions about system architecture and long-term scalability. About encryption models and user authentication protocols. About the philosophy behind her code choices, why she structured things certain ways, not just how. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Dylan always brushed off her suggestions with dismissive phrases: "You overthink things, babe. Sometimes you just gotta move fast and break things. Trust me, investors don't care about elegant code, they care about growth metrics." But Sebastian studied her like she was a hidden asset, a masterpiece in a garage sale that only an expert I could recognize. "I've been watching your boyfriend's company," Sebastian said quietly, stirring his coffee. "The technology is impressive. But the patterns in the code suggest something interesting." Harper's heart rate increased slightly. She kept her face neutral. "What patterns?" she asked carefully. "Different minds at work," Sebastian continued. "The early versions have a certain roughness. Functional but inelegant. Then suddenly, about 18 months in, the architecture becomes cleaner. More sophisticated. The logic deepens. The efficiency improves dramatically." He paused, holding her gaze. "That's not evolution. That's revolution. That's a different architect." Harper said nothing. Years of hiding had taught her that silence was safer than truth. Sebastian smiled slightly, not predatory, but understanding. "I'm not here to expose you, Mississippi Lane. I'm here to offer you something." "What?" "A choice," he said simply. "You can continue building someone else's empire while they take the credit and the wealth and the recognition. Or you can build your own." Harper felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but opening. Like a door she didn't know existed suddenly revealing light beyond. "Brilliance should never hide in the shadow of ego," Sebastian said quietly. Those words changed her life. Back in the present, the private car pulled up outside Dylan's building, sleek, black, silent as a promise. The driver stepped out and loaded Harper's luggage without asking questions. No judgment. No curiosity. Just professional efficiency. As they drove toward the private airport, Harper stared out at the city lights sliding past the tinted windows. Memories flickered through her mind like old film reels running at double speed. She remembered the late nights debugging Dylan's code while he slept. The way she'd gently close his laptop and transfer his half-written functions to her own machine, fixing logic errors and security vulnerabilities while he dreamed of investor meetings and magazine covers. She remembered the funding celebration where Dylan gave a speech thanking everyone who believed in the vision, while she stood in the back of the room, invisible in a crowd of people who didn't know her name. She remembered Grant joking in interviews that Dylan was a lone genius who saw patterns nobody else could see. She never corrected them. Not because she was weak. Not because she didn't know her worth. But because she believed loyalty mattered. She believed that love meant supporting your partner's success, even from the shadows. What she'd learned too late was that loyalty without respect becomes self-betrayal. The car reached the private terminal. A matte black jet waited on the runway, engines humming softly like a heartbeat. Harper stepped out and inhaled deeply. This was the point of no return. Fear whispered in her ear, "You're throwing away everything. 7 years. A comfortable life. Security." But a stronger voice, her own voice, finally, whispered back, "No. You're reclaiming everything they stole." Inside the jet, Sebastian stood as she entered. He wore a simple charcoal suit, no flashy watch, no designer everything, just quiet confidence. "You made the decision," he said calmly. "Yes," Harper replied. "Are you certain? Once we move forward, there will be consequences. For him. And attention for you." Harper held his gaze. For 7 years, she'd looked down when men spoke. Apologized for taking up space. Made herself smaller so Dylan could seem larger. Not anymore. "I'm done hiding," she said. The jet lifted into the night sky. Harper watched Chicago grow smaller beneath them, the city where she'd built someone else's dream, where she'd learned to be invisible, where she'd almost forgotten her own name. For the first time in years, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of just holding someone else up. 4 hours later, they landed in New York. Manhattan glittered beneath them like scattered diamonds. Sebastian had arranged dinner at an exclusive rooftop restaurant, the kind of place where tech moguls announced acquisitions and political figures brokered deals that would never appear in official records. Word had quietly spread through the right channels that Sebastian Cole was meeting a potential strategic partner. Media outlets that tracked billionaire movements had already positioned photographers outside the restaurant. The game was beginning. As the car pulled up, cameras were already waiting, a dozen photographers with expensive equipment, hungry for the shot that would lead tomorrow's business section. Harper stepped out beside Sebastian. She wore an elegant black dress that flowed around her figure like water. Minimal jewelry. Natural makeup that enhanced rather than masked. No desperate attempt to look like something she wasn't. Just confidence. And confidence, it turns out, is the most expensive thing you can wear. Flashes exploded around them like lightning storms. Voices shouted questions. "Mr. Cole. Who is she? Is this a new acquisition? Is she the architect behind the rumored cybersecurity platform?" Harper didn't answer. She simply stood beside Sebastian, her posture straight, her expression calm. Inside, the restaurant glowed with warm light and the soft clink of crystal. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, a canvas of possibility. They sat near the edge, overlooking the river where boats moved like slow thoughts. Sebastian poured wine into her glass. "To timing," he said quietly. Harper lifted her glass. "To truth." Meanwhile, in Chicago, Dylan woke to his phone vibrating relentlessly. He groaned and reached for it, eyes still heavy with sleep. The screen showed hundreds of notifications, texts, calls, social media alerts, all piling up like an avalanche. Grant called immediately, his voice panicked. "Have you seen the headlines?" Dylan opened Twitter. And there she was. Harper Lane, sitting beside Sebastian Cole, smiling softly while photographers captured every angle. The headline read, "Tech billionaire Sebastian Cole spotted with mysterious strategist at exclusive NYC restaurant." Speculation was already spreading like wildfire. Sources suggest she may be the real mind behind emerging technology that could disrupt the logistics sector. Industry insiders questioning the origin of certain breakthrough code in existing platforms. Who is Harper Lane, and why has she been invisible until now? Dylan felt heat rush to his face. He zoomed into the photo. She looked different. Not because of the dress or the setting. Because of something in her eyes. Something in the way she held herself. Confidence radiated from her like light. Investors began messaging him immediately. Did you lose a key team member? Need to discuss potential IP concerns. Can we schedule an urgent call about development history? Industry forums were lighting up with questions. Old contributors were hinting anonymously that Harper had more influence on the company's technology than publicly acknowledged. Someone posted a side-by-side comparison of code commits, early versions versus later versions, pointing out stark differences in style, efficiency, and sophistication. Grant called again, frantic, "We need damage control. Now." Dylan barely heard him. He remembered her calm expression at the door. The small black hard drive she'd taken. The way she'd said, "I have options." Quiet fear began creeping into his chest like cold water filling a sinking ship. What exactly had she built? And what was she about to do with it? Back in New York, dessert arrived, delicate, artistic, the kind of food that's almost too beautiful to eat. Harper felt her phone vibrate. She glanced at it briefly. 17 missed calls from Dylan. 12 texts from Grant. 5 from mutual acquaintances who'd never bothered to remember her name at parties. She didn't respond to any of them. Sebastian watched her thoughtfully. By morning, he said, the narrative will begin to shift. Harper inhaled slowly. For years, she had accepted being invisible. Tonight, the world was beginning to look at her differently. Not as someone left behind. As someone stepping forward. Are you prepared for what comes next? Sebastian asked quietly. This won't be easy. There will be backlash. Questions. Possibly legal challenges. Harper looked out at the city lights stretching toward infinity. I've already survived the hardest part, she said softly. Believing I didn't matter. Sebastian smiled, genuine respect in his expression. Then let's show them what invisible brilliance looks like when it finally steps into the light. Morning in Chicago didn't feel the same anymore. Dylan Brooks stood in front of the massive glass window of his penthouse, staring down at the city that once made him feel powerful. Now it felt like it was watching him. Judging him. His phone hadn't stopped vibrating since sunrise. Investors. Board members. Tech bloggers. Even former employees he hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly asking questions he didn't know how to answer. Grant Holloway paced across the living room with the restless energy of a caged animal. He kept refreshing financial news sites as if staring harder would make the headlines disappear. This is temporary, Grant insisted, his voice carrying a desperation he couldn't quite hide. People love drama. By next week, it'll fade. Dylan didn't answer. He was reading a thread on a popular tech forum, one that was gaining traction faster than wildfire. Someone had posted a detailed breakdown of his company's original system architecture. The anonymous user pointed out stylistic differences in early versions of the code. Subtle changes in structure. Improved encryption methods that appeared suddenly 2 years after launch. The post ended with one devastating sentence. The real architect was never credited. Dylan felt his throat tighten. He remembered those nights with painful clarity now, the frustration of scaling issues he couldn't solve, Harper quietly taking the laptop and telling him to sleep, problems mysteriously vanishing by morning. He'd told himself she was just helping. Assisting. Polishing his ideas. He never allowed himself to think deeper. Now the internet was thinking for him. Grant's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his face went pale. Sebastian Cole just confirmed he's speaking at the Global Innovation Summit in San Francisco tomorrow. He paused. And guess who's listed as special guest? Dylan didn't need to ask. Back in New York, Harper stood in front of a mirror inside a high-rise hotel suite. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, painting soft lines across the polished marble floors. She wasn't wearing the elegant dress from last night. She wore simple tailored pants and a cream blouse. Comfortable. Focused. Ready. Sebastian sat at the dining table reviewing documents on a tablet. The summit audience will include venture capital firms, cybersecurity analysts, and several government representatives, he said calmly. They believe I'm unveiling a new defensive infrastructure platform. Harper nodded. Are you nervous? He asked. A little, she admitted. He stood and walked toward her. Good. Nervousness means you care about accuracy. Arrogance means you don't. She gave a faint smile, the first genuine one she'd felt in weeks. The Global Innovation Summit in San Francisco was legendary. Founders secured billion-dollar funding after speaking on that stage. Companies collapsed when credibility shattered there. Harper knew this appearance wasn't about revenge. It was about ownership. As the private jet landed in California that afternoon, media attention had doubled. News outlets were now framing her as the mysterious woman behind a possible technology shift. Dylan had purchased a last-minute ticket through one of his contacts. He convinced himself he needed to control the narrative before it spiraled further. He didn't realize the narrative was never his to control. Inside the main auditorium, hundreds of executives and developers filled theater-style seats. Screens projected a sleek introduction video for Sterling Ventures. Dylan took a seat near the middle row, adjusting his suit nervously. Whispers moved through the crowd as people recognized him. Some stared with curiosity. Others with skepticism. Then the lights dimmed. Sebastian walked onto the stage first. Applause followed, calm, controlled, respectful. He spoke about data vulnerability. About the increasing theft of intellectual property. About the need for transparent authorship verification in digital systems. Dylan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Then Sebastian paused. For years, he continued, his voice carrying authority without arrogance, the industry has celebrated faces instead of foundations. We've built empires on invisible labor. We've given credit to those who market ideas rather than those who architect them. He turned slightly toward the side of the stage. It's time to correct that imbalance. Please welcome the chief architect of our new cybersecurity platform, Harper Lane. The spotlight shifted. Harper stepped forward. The auditorium grew quiet, not the uncomfortable silence of confusion, but the focused silence of people recognizing they're about to witness something significant. She didn't rush. She didn't smile dramatically. She simply walked to the center and stood tall. Dylan felt heat crawl up his neck, his hands gripping the armrests. Morning in Chicago didn't feel the same anymore. Dylan Brooks stood in front of the massive glass window of his penthouse, staring down at the city that once made him feel powerful. Now it felt like it was watching him. Judging him. His phone hadn't stopped vibrating since sunrise. Investors. Board members. Tech bloggers. Even former employees he hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly asking questions he didn't know how to answer. Grant Holloway paced across the living room with the restless energy of a caged animal. He kept refreshing financial news sites as if staring harder would make the headlines disappear. This is temporary, Grant insisted, his voice carrying a desperation he couldn't quite hide. People love drama. By next week, it'll fade. Dylan didn't answer. He was reading a thread on a popular tech forum, one that was gaining traction faster than wildfire. Someone had posted a detailed breakdown of his company's original system architecture. The anonymous user pointed out stylistic differences in early versions of the code. Subtle changes in structure. Improved encryption methods that appeared suddenly 2 years after launch. The post ended with one devastating sentence. The real architect was never credited. Dylan felt his throat tighten. He remembered those nights with painful clarity now, the frustration of scaling issues he couldn't solve, Harper quietly taking the laptop and telling him to sleep, problems mysteriously vanishing by morning. He'd told himself she was just helping. Assisting. Polishing his ideas. He never allowed himself to think deeper. Now the internet was thinking for him. Grant's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his face went pale. Sebastian Cole just confirmed he's speaking at the Global Innovation Summit in San Francisco tomorrow. He paused. And guess who's listed as special guest? Dylan didn't need to ask. Back in New York, Harper stood in front of a mirror inside a high-rise hotel suite. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, painting soft lines across the polished marble floors. She wasn't wearing the elegant dress from last night. She wore simple tailored pants and a cream blouse. Comfortable. Focused. Ready. Sebastian sat at the dining table reviewing documents on a tablet. The summit audience will include venture capital firms, cybersecurity analysts, and several government representatives, he said calmly. They believe I'm unveiling a new defensive infrastructure platform. Harper nodded. Are you nervous? He asked. A little, she admitted. He stood and walked toward her. Good. Nervousness means you care about accuracy. Arrogance means you don't. She gave a faint smile, the first genuine one she'd felt in weeks. The Global Innovation Summit in San Francisco was legendary. Founders secured billion-dollar funding after speaking on that stage. Companies collapsed when credibility shattered there. Harper knew this appearance wasn't about revenge. It was about ownership. As the private jet landed in California that afternoon, media attention had doubled. News outlets were now framing her as the mysterious woman behind a possible technology shift. Dylan had purchased a last-minute ticket through one of his contacts. He convinced himself he needed to control the narrative before it spiraled further. He didn't realize the narrative was never his to control. Inside the main auditorium, hundreds of executives and developers filled theater-style seats. Screens projected a sleek introduction video for Sterling Ventures. Dylan took a seat near the middle row, adjusting his suit nervously. Whispers moved through the crowd as people recognized him. Some stared with curiosity. Others with skepticism. Then the lights dimmed. Sebastian walked onto the stage first. Applause followed, calm, controlled, respectful. He spoke about data vulnerability. About the increasing theft of intellectual property. About the need for transparent authorship verification in digital systems. Dylan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Then Sebastian paused. For years, he continued, his voice carrying authority without arrogance, the industry has celebrated faces instead of foundations. We've built empires on invisible labor. We've given credit to those who market ideas rather than those who architect them. He turned slightly toward the side of the stage. It's time to correct that imbalance. Please welcome the chief architect of our new cybersecurity platform, Harper Lane. The spotlight shifted. Harper stepped forward. The auditorium grew quiet, not the uncomfortable silence of confusion, but the focused silence of people recognizing they're about to witness something significant. She didn't rush. She didn't smile dramatically. She simply walked to the center and stood tall. Dylan felt heat crawl up his neck, his hands gripping the armrests. Harper began speaking in steady, clear tones that commanded attention without demanding it. She explained how intellectual property theft often begins with subtle credit manipulation. How teams sometimes hide true contributors behind charismatic leaders. How systems can embed digital signatures that trace authorship beyond public claims. Each sentence felt precise. Deliberate. Like watching a master surgeon make calculated incisions. On the large screen behind her, she displayed segments of anonymized code comparisons, structural patterns, timing metadata, version histories that told stories words couldn't capture. Then she paused. 2 years ago, she said calmly, I designed a root layer encryption model that was implemented inside a rapidly growing logistics platform. That model reduced breach attempts by 40%. She let that sink in. However, my name was never attached to its release. The audience murmured. Phones came out. Screenshots were taken. Dylan's palms began to sweat. She wasn't accusing directly. She was demonstrating capability. She was showing the world what invisible brilliance looked like when it finally chose to speak. Harper continued outlining her new platform, a system that could verify authorship trails and protect innovators from being erased from their own creations. When she finished, applause filled the room, stronger than before, genuine and sustained. Sebastian returned to the stage and announced that Sterling Ventures would fund the platform with immediate global rollout plans. Questions from the audience followed. One analyst asked how Harper handled being underestimated. Being underestimated, she answered calmly, gave me time to build without pressure. Another asked whether her experience influenced the platform design. She paused briefly, and for the first time, emotion flickered across her face. Experience teaches you to protect what you create. In the middle row, Dylan could no longer sit still. He stood up. Harper, he called out. The room shifted. Cameras turned toward him instantly. Sebastian remained composed. Harper looked at Dylan without visible emotion, just acknowledgement. This isn't the place, Dylan said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. If you have concerns about authorship or credit, we can discuss privately. There's no need to imply anything publicly. Harper tilted her head slightly. I implied nothing, she replied. I described functionality. Some audience members chuckled softly. Dylan pressed forward, desperation making him reckless. You were part of a team. Everyone contributed. You're making it sound like you were hidden deliberately. Harper met his gaze steadily. Was I credited in official filings for the root encryption model? She asked evenly. Dylan hesitated. The silence stretched longer than comfortable. No, he admitted quietly. Because you weren't on payroll at that time, he added quickly, trying to justify. Harper nodded. Yet the model was accepted and implemented. Yes, he replied. Sebastian stepped forward. Intellectual property doesn't depend on payroll status, he said calmly. It depends on authorship. A journalist near the front raised her hand. Are you confirming that Mississippi Lane created core components of Brooks Logistics Systems? Harper answered before Dylan could scramble for damage control. I am confirming that I created specific foundational components which were deployed successfully. Gasps moved through the hall like a wave. Dylan felt his control slipping through his fingers like sand. After the session ended, media surrounded Harper and Sebastian. Dylan was left standing alone near the aisle, his phone exploding with notifications he couldn't bring himself to read. Grant called repeatedly. Investors demanded explanations. Within hours, financial analysts began reviewing Brooks Logistics filings with forensic attention. Questions about early development credit surfaced publicly. Share prices dipped 8% by closing bell. Not catastrophic yet, but unstable. Like a building with cracks in its foundation. That evening, a private reception followed the summit. Harper stood near a balcony overlooking the San Francisco skyline, the city glowing like scattered embers. Sebastian joined her quietly. You handled that well, he said. She exhaled slowly. It felt strange, speaking aloud what I kept silent for years. He studied her profile against the city lights. Do you regret stepping into this? She shook her head. I regret staying invisible for so long. Inside the ballroom, Dylan watched from across the room. Anger mixed with something deeper, realization. He walked toward her again. Harper, he said, more quietly this time. Can we speak privately? Sebastian glanced at her, silently asking permission. She nodded once. They stepped into a side corridor where music was muffled and honesty could exist. Dylan's voice dropped. "You're letting him use you to attack me." Harper looked at him calmly. "No one is using me." "You're angry," he insisted. "This is revenge." She took a slow breath. "If it were revenge," she said softly, "I would have exposed everything months ago. This is correction." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture familiar but powerless now. "You're going to destroy the company. Hundreds of employees depend on it." Harper's eyes sharpened slightly. "Then you should have protected its integrity from the beginning." He stepped closer. "I built that company." She held his gaze without blinking. "You marketed it." The words landed heavier than shouting. Heavier than tears. Heavier than anything Dylan had prepared for. For the first time, he saw not the supportive partner he'd dismissed, but a strategist. Someone who understood systems deeper than he ever had. Someone who'd been playing chess while he thought they were playing checkers. Footsteps approached, reporters searching for statements. Harper turned to leave. "This isn't personal destruction," she said quietly before walking away. "It's structural truth." Back inside the reception, Sebastian announced that their new cybersecurity company would officially launch under the name Lucid Shield Technologies, with Harper as co-founder and chief systems architect. Applause filled the room once more. By midnight, headlines across financial media reported the partnership. Sebastian Cole partners with Harper Lane to launch revolutionary cybersecurity platform. The invisible architect steps into the light, Harper Lane's story. Brooks Logistics faces credibility crisis as former partner reveals development truth. In Chicago the next morning, the company's board scheduled an emergency meeting. Share prices had dropped another 6% overnight. Employees whispered in hallways. Developers revisited old commits in the repository, suddenly seeing patterns they'd overlooked. Some began quietly sending resumes elsewhere. Dylan sat at the head of the conference table, trying to maintain composure while his world fractured around him. Board members asked direct questions he couldn't dodge anymore. Did Harper contribute to foundational code? Yes, he admitted reluctantly. Why was she never credited formally? He struggled to answer without admitting negligence, without revealing that pride and ego had blinded him to ethical obligations. By the end of the meeting, the board demanded a full internal audit. Meanwhile, in California, Harper reviewed beta tests for Lucid Shield. The system performed flawlessly, elegant, efficient, powerful. Sebastian entered her office. "We expected resistance. It has begun." She nodded. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked. "Legal review. Possible court involvement. Public scrutiny." Harper closed her laptop slowly. "I've already faced the hardest part," she replied. "Believing my work mattered." Outside her window, the city shimmered with movement. Power was shifting, not loudly, not violently, but steadily. And somewhere in a high-rise office in Chicago, Dylan finally understood that losing Harper wasn't simply a breakup. It was the collapse of a foundation he never realized he was standing on. 3 months later. 3 months later, the situation was no longer gossip. It was reality. Brooks Logistics underwent a complete restructuring. Dylan remained as CEO in name, but with significantly reduced authority. The board appointed an ethics committee. Several key employees left to join Lucid Shield. Lucid Shield Technologies launched to immediate industry acclaim. Harper gave interviews, not about Dylan, but about her vision for protecting intellectual property and invisible contributors. She spoke at conferences. She mentored young women in tech. She built an empire not on ego, but on integrity. Sebastian remained her partner and friend, but their relationship stayed professional, mutual respect, shared vision, no romantic entanglement. Harper had learned that love without respect was prison. She wouldn't settle for anything less than both. Dylan sent her one final message months after everything settled. "I'm sorry. I didn't see you until you were gone." She read it once. Then deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but because some apologies come too late to matter. The life lesson. Harper Lane's story teaches us something profound about worth, visibility, and the courage to claim what's yours. 1. Your value doesn't depend on someone else recognizing it. Harper was brilliant whether Dylan acknowledged it or not. The code didn't change. Her intelligence didn't diminish. Only the recognition was missing. 2. Loyalty without respect is self-betrayal. Giving endlessly to someone who doesn't value you isn't love, it's self-abandonment. 3. Silence can be strategic patience. Harper didn't explode. She didn't fight publicly. She built quietly. And when the time was right, she spoke with evidence, not emotion. 4. The people who dismiss you often depend on you more than they realize. Dylan built an empire on Harper's invisible labor. When she left, the foundation crumbled. 5. Stepping into your own light isn't selfish, it's survival. Harper had every right to claim her work, her worth, her voice. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop making yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. Sometimes the bravest act is walking away from what's familiar toward what you deserve. Sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones who change everything.